Well, extreme cold has forced NASA to reschedule its next moon mission.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
12 people have walked on the lunar surface. All of them came home. None of them ever truly explained why humanity stopped going back.
But it also is a human moment, you know, and I would love for us to have a moment of togetherness, for humans to just go, hey, there's a part of humanity that's not in touch with the rest of us.
The official explanation has always been money. But funding never stopped us from launching space telescopes, sending rovers to Mars, or maintaining a permanent station in orbit.
Oh my golly! Unbelievable! Unbelievable, but is it bright in the sun?
Something else stopped us. And the man who knew the reason stayed silent for 50 years, until now. A man who had already been there. Something about the moon never sat right with him. For half a century, Charles Duke kept quiet about what he witnessed before he ever set foot on the lunar surface. During Apollo 11, Duke was in mission control as Capcom, the only person allowed to speak directly to the astronauts.
Liberty, this is freedom. Do you read me? Liberty, this is freedom.
When Neil Armstrong said, "The Eagle has landed," it wasn't just a dramatic line. It meant the lunar module had touched down after a descent filled with alarms and critically low fuel. Duke replied, "Roger, tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You've got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again." He wasn't joking. The entire room had been holding its breath because they knew the landing had come within seconds of failing. Armstrong had less than 30 seconds of descent fuel left. When he saw the landing site littered with rocks, he knew that if the fuel ran out, they would crash or be forced into a desperate last-second abort. Neil took manual control, found a safer spot, and landed with almost no time remaining. Duke's message was pure relief. They had narrowly avoided disaster. That level of pressure defined Duke's life, and he carried it into every mission afterward. Before Apollo 16, he had already trained for Apollo 13, the mission that nearly cost 3 astronauts their lives. When an oxygen tank exploded, they lost power, heat, and their primary oxygen supply. They were on the brink of freezing and suffocating at the same time. The entire mission turned into an improvised fight for survival. Duke trained knowing that such chaos was always possible. To him, space wasn't exploration, it was survival. And then there were the private battles no one saw. At one point, the strain of his career nearly destroyed his marriage. He later admitted he had become withdrawn, consumed, and emotionally absent. The same intense focus that made him dependable in space was quietly hurting the people he loved most. Then came something even heavier. After walking on the moon, Duke went through a profound internal crisis. He later revealed that despite achieving something almost no human ever will, he felt strangely empty when he returned home. Imagine standing on another world and still feeling like something vital is missing. Silence like that changes a person. So when Apollo 16 launched in April 1972, Charles Duke wasn't just another astronaut. He was a man who understood exactly how thin the line between success and catastrophe really was. He spent 71 hours on and around the moon. And when he came back, something in him was different. Quiet rumors have circulated for years that for days after returning, he barely spoke. Some said he would stare off into nothing, as if trying to process something he couldn't put into words. Others recalled that he looked shaken, lost even, and at times suffered from severe headaches and vomiting, as if whatever he'd experienced hadn't fully let him go. Then, just as suddenly, he stopped talking about it, for 50 years, until now. What he finally revealed begins with a mission that, on paper, looked completely ordinary. Before we get into this, if you're new here, hit that like button and subscribe right now. What you're about to hear is the kind of story that deserves to be seen. Apollo 16 lifted off on April 16, 1972, carrying 3 astronauts. John Young, the mission commander, had already been to the moon once on Apollo 10. Ken Mattingly piloted the command module, staying in lunar orbit while the others descended. And Charles Duke, the lunar module pilot, was the man who would stand beside Young on the moon. One of 3 highly trained, meticulously chosen astronauts assigned to what was expected to become one of the most scientifically valuable missions in the entire Apollo program. Their destination was a region known as the Descartes Highlands. Geologists selected this site with purpose. The highlands were believed to hold some of the oldest rock anywhere on the moon, material formed during the violent infancy of the solar system billions of years ago. Scientists hoped these untouched formations would answer fundamental questions about how the moon, and by extension Earth, first came into existence. The mission objectives were simple on paper. Duke and Young were to deploy scientific instruments to measure moonquakes, solar wind, and cosmic radiation. They would collect rock and soil samples from areas no previous mission had reached. On top of that, they were tasked with pushing the lunar rover into rougher and more uneven terrain than any Apollo crew had attempted, testing both the rover's limits and their own ability to navigate difficult ground. Young and Duke touched down in the lunar module Orion on April 21st. Over the next 3 days, they performed 3 EVAs, extravehicular activities. The first lasted more than 7 hours. The second stretched beyond that. The third ran just under 6. Altogether, the 2 men spent over 20 hours working directly on the lunar surface, covering more than 16 miles in the rover and gathering 211 pounds of geological samples. Everything they did was monitored from Earth. Mission Control recorded every word they spoke and tracked every reading from their suits. Oxygen levels, heart rate, exact location. If something had gone wrong, Houston would have known instantly. But nothing went wrong, and that's crucial to understand. Apollo 16 was running flawlessly. No system issues, no medical concerns, no deviations from the mission plan. By every measurable metric, it was one of the cleanest, smoothest missions in Apollo history. The Descartes Highlands were supposed to provide humanity with a calm, undisturbed look into the moon's ancient past. Predictable geology, stable terrain, controlled observation. Roughly 5 hours into their work on a flat region called the Cayley Plains, the 2 astronauts had been outside for hours. Everything was operating exactly as expected. Then Duke saw something that should not have been there. The anomalies began before they ever reached it. The moon has no atmosphere, none. Sunlight hits the surface unfiltered, white, harsh, uniform. Shadows are pitch black because nothing scatters the light. No gradients, no soft edges, no color variation. The environment behaves exactly as physics dictates. And up to that moment, that was exactly what Duke had been seeing. But during the second EVA, as he and Young steered the rover deeper into the Cayley Plains, Duke noticed the light changing. The pure white sunlight he had been working under for hours began to shift. Soft greens and blues appeared. Color where no color should exist. There was no equipment malfunction that could cause this. There was no atmospheric trick, because there is no atmosphere. The colors had no physical source. Duke glanced at Young. Young was seeing the same thing. They reported it to Houston immediately. Houston offered no explanation and instructed them to continue. That alone should have halted the EVA. It didn't. The second anomaly hit them in the same area, and it was even harder to rationalize. Sound cannot travel on the moon. With no atmosphere, there's no medium for sound waves to move through. The only audio Duke and Young could hear came through radio or through direct mechanical vibration. But in that same stretch of the Cayley Plains, both men began hearing tones, harmonic, structured tones, through their helmets. Not static, not radio interference, something organized, something resonant. They reported this as well. Again, no explanation. Again, continue the mission. Then came the third anomaly: time. Duke later described feeling moments during the second EVA where his sense of time slipped. Tasks that should have taken minutes felt like they were over in seconds. Their timers showed the correct elapsed time, but Duke's internal perception didn't match reality. Something in that area was affecting his sense of time itself. The fourth anomaly was the hardest for Duke to verbalize. Throughout that region, both he and Young felt watched. Not a mild unease, an acute, persistent sense of being observed. Something, somewhere, was aware of them. Duke was a military test pilot trained specifically to suppress that kind of distraction. He couldn't. Young felt it as well. All four anomalies, the abnormal colors, the impossible sounds, the warped perception of time, and the unmistakable sensation of being observed, occurred in the same concentrated pocket of the Cayley Plains, the area they were still driving through. When Duke lifted his eyes toward the horizon, he initially assumed he was looking at a ridge or rock formation, something natural. But as they drove closer, that explanation collapsed. The structure he was seeing had the wrong shape. Too geometric, too regular, by billions of years of random, violent impacts. But this wasn't. Natural formations are irregular, uneven, and organic. What Duke was staring at had angles, straight edges, sharp lines that had absolutely no place on the moon. He pointed it out to Young. Young saw it instantly. Without a word exchanged, they steered the rover off their planned route and drove roughly 200 meters toward it. As they approached, the object did not resolve into a ridge or a boulder field. It became even more impossible. Duke later described it as a wall or foundation-like structure nearly 100 meters long, constructed from large blocks arranged in a pattern that was unmistakably intentional. This was not the result of geology. Something had built it. The structure was partially buried. Only the uppermost section protruded above the surface. Whatever lay beneath was larger, much larger, hidden under the regolith. The blocks were darker and smoother than surrounding lunar rock. Their edges were sharp, their corners precise. Some pieces seemed fitted together in ways that clearly implied design. Though countless meteor strikes had chipped and damaged the joints, the deliberate construction was still obvious. Something intelligent had placed those stones. Duke and Young stopped the rover about 50 meters away and called Houston. They gave a full description of what they were seeing and requested permission to move closer and take detailed photographs. Houston went silent. The pause stretched out, seconds, maybe minutes. Duke admits the time distortion they had been experiencing made the duration impossible to judge. Finally, a voice returned. It wasn't their usual Capcom. It was someone higher up. The instruction was calm and clipped. Do not approach the structure. Photograph it from your current position, then proceed immediately to the designated sampling site. No explanation, no questions, no surprise. Nothing from a team of scientists who would normally erupt with excitement over a minor anomaly, let alone a discovery of this magnitude. Just a composed, practiced directive to move on. Duke and Young were military men. They obeyed. They took the photos, turned the rover around, and continued with the EVA. But Duke knew what that silence meant, the speed of the redirection, the senior voice, the total lack of shock. Houston had not heard this for the first time. Whatever they had found, Mission Control already knew how to respond. When Duke returned to Earth and reviewed the mission images during debriefing, the photographs of the structure were missing. First, he was told they were being analyzed. Then, that there were development issues. Later, they were said to be classified. Finally, years after that, he was told they'd been misplaced during an archive reorganization. 4 different explanations, each contradicting the last. That pattern isn't random. When something is genuinely lost, the story stays the same. When the story keeps changing, someone is managing it, adjusting the narrative as needed. Across 50 years, those shifting explanations form the unmistakable outline of a deliberate suppression. The photos never reappeared in any NASA archive, research collection, or declassified Apollo document. Duke remembered seeing the images on the initial contact sheets. Then they were gone, pulled into classification and never returned. Without them, officials could dismiss his account as a failing memory. That's exactly how a cover-up works. Remove the evidence, undermine the witness. But those missing structure photos weren't the only images erased. There was something else on that contact sheet. Something Duke avoided talking about for decades. While Duke and Young waited in the rover, staring at the structure and awaiting Houston's response, something moved. Not a shifting shadow, not part of the anomalous lighting. Something independent, something near the structure. Duke saw it first. He turned to Young. Young was already watching it. He described the shape as upright, humanoid in outline but not human, taller than any person, and the way it moved was wrong. Not wrong like a malfunctioning machine, but wrong in the subtle, unmistakable way a living creature moves when it did not evolve under Earth's gravity. Its motion didn't match anything Duke had been trained to identify. It wasn't equipment. It wasn't debris. It moved with intent, along the edge of a structure that should not have existed. Duke raised his camera and took a photograph. The shutter fired, the frame captured. He says he didn't hesitate. The figure was in motion, and they were nearly 50 meters away, so the image wasn't perfectly sharp, but the shape was there, upright, distinct, clearly separate from the structure behind it. Unmistakably, it was not a rock, not a shadow, and not any piece of Apollo equipment. Yet, when Duke returned to Earth and reviewed the debriefing photographs, that image was gone. It had been on the same roll of film, in the same sequence as the photographs of the structure. All of it disappeared together, swallowed by the same classified silence. Duke is not the only person who saw it. Although he refuses to name individuals, he has mentioned in recent interviews that others were present during the initial debriefing review, people who saw the contact sheets before anything was classified. These individuals confirmed that the image existed. The photograph was there, and then it wasn't. For decades, Duke said nothing about it. The structure he could hint at carefully. He could describe it as a geological anomaly, something requiring further investigation, something science had not yet explained. That approach gave him room. But there is no such room for what he saw moving beside that structure. There is no scientific category for it, no official vocabulary that makes it easier to report. It sits completely outside anything our institutions are prepared to acknowledge, and Duke understood that from the moment he saw it. He has said recently that this was the detail that took him the longest to say aloud, not because he doubted what he saw. He has no doubt. Young saw it too. The photograph existed. Others confirmed it before it vanished from the record. Duke's hesitation was never uncertainty. It was the cost of speaking. He knew that the moment he described a figure moving on the lunar surface beside a buried structure, many people would stop taking him seriously. Duke spent 50 years building a reputation as one of the most reliable, disciplined figures in the history of human space exploration. He knew exactly what this admission would cost him, and he said it anyway. He saw it. Young saw it. The photograph was taken, reviewed, confirmed, and then erased, along with everything else that happened in that region of the Cayley Plains. Once you accept that, the question of why Apollo ended stops being political or financial. It becomes something else entirely. It becomes the only question that matters. And Duke's answer to it is the most unsettling thing he has ever said. One detail from the structure stayed with him longer than anything else: the age of the blocks. The moon has no weather like Earth, but its surface is constantly struck by micrometeorites, blasted by solar radiation, and exposed to temperature extremes that break down exposed materials. Geologists can read that process like a clock. The deeper the weathering, the older the exposure. The blocks show deep weathering. Not thousands of years, millions, possibly hundreds of millions. That places the construction of the structure in a time predating every human civilization, predating our species entirely, predating even the evolutionary line that eventually led to humans. Whatever built that structure existed when the most advanced life on Earth was still learning to survive. Duke is not alone in suggesting Apollo found more than it reported. Edgar Mitchell, of Apollo 14, spent his final years insisting that governments are hiding evidence of non-human contact. Mitchell was no fringe figure. He held a doctorate from MIT and worked inside one of the most classified programs humanity has ever run. Al Worden of Apollo 15 went even further, stating publicly that evidence of non-human intelligence exists in our solar system and is being concealed, speaking as someone with top-level security clearances. These were not outsiders. They were men trusted with the deepest secrets of their era. And yet the ones who spoke most freely near the end of their lives all pointed in the same direction. Not toward budgets or public interest, but toward something discovered and then buried. And we have not returned. Not in 50 years. We have the technology. We have spent billions exploring farther than Apollo ever dreamed. But the moon, the one place we already know how to reach, the one place where something was found, has not seen a human footprint since December 1972. That is not coincidence. It is a decision. Once you accept Duke's account, the logic becomes clear. Every mission risks another discovery, another photograph that must be erased, another crew forced to carry secrets they cannot speak. Eventually, the safest solution is to end the program entirely, let history move on, and hope the questions fade. Duke believes that is exactly what happened. Not one dramatic act of suppression, but a long, cold calculation. Continuing the program had become too dangerous to manage. Questions about what was built on the moon, what was standing beside it, and what those things imply about who we are. Charles Duke is 89 years old, and he has finally told you what he saw,